Okay, welcome everyone. This is a 90-minute webinar about worker co-op startup. And my name is Matt Feinstein. He, him pronouns. I live in central Massachusetts on Nipmuc territory. And I was a worker owner of a media cooperative for 10 years and part of a grassroots co-op development group in Worcester, Massachusetts. And have been part of the co-op clinic team at the US Federation of Worker Co-ops for 4 years. And I'm excited to share some information about worker co-ops and how to get started and ways of organizing your team and things like that. I did share in the chat a links document that you can use instead of jotting down all the resources that we mentioned. You can have them all in that place. You can make a copy, take your notes in there, however you'd like to use that resource. And please share a little bit about yourselves and feel free to network in the chat as well with each other. And as we go along, I'm very open to questions, especially as if they're pertinent to what I'm talking about or might be relevant to more than your specific situation. I'll address them as we go or take them at the end. We'll have some time at the end as well for questions, additional resources, discussion. So yeah, feel free to check in the chat. And at any point in here, please do chime in the chat with questions or additions. So the Co-op Clinic is the technical assistance and training program of the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, and we're based around a network of peer advisors. These are folks who are in co-ops themselves, in worker co-ops, or have been in worker co-ops for years and are now advisors, right? They're experts in certain areas where they can support other co-ops, but they don't come in as experts, and telling a co-op this is the only way to do it. They come as peers. Well, in our co-op we did this. I've also seen these. Here are good templates. And so that's how we do a lot of our support with the co-op clinic is through the work of these peer advisors that bring their own experiences and cultural affirming practices um, to co-ops around the country. So reach out when you're ready to get some support. If you have a project that needs some support, we have this network of peer advisors we can connect you with. And there, is a quick form you fill out on our website, and then you get connected to us. You get our calendars right away, and you can sign up for this 30-minute consultation. We'll get you specific resources for your co-op and things like that. So that's the co-op clinic, and this is part of it as well, to just share resources and tools we have. So also, I wanted to just mention that for those just arriving, that there's a links document that I've shared with you in the chat, and you can look at that for a lot of the resources we're mentioning here. So let's dive into co-ops in general. There's many ways of organizing cooperatives. When we talk about co-ops, we're talking about social enterprises, right? Enterprises that exist to meet a need in the community, but they are set up as businesses. But we can organize them in lots of different ways. But one way we like to do it is in putting them into these three buckets, right? If people have come together to buy together, we call those consumer cooperatives. And those broadly, you might be familiar with those around uh, natural grocery stores, right? That are started by the consumers. They wanted access to good food at good prices in their neighborhood, so they started a grocery store that's consumer owned. That could be a food co-op, right? A food cooperative. But this also includes people who have come together to own their housing together, housing co-ops, or credit unions are also a type of consumer cooperative, right? The folks using those banking institutions are technically the member owners of those cooperatives. Um, and then there's producer cooperatives where people have come together to sell and market together, right? This is common in agricultural practices in our agricultural sectors. So not everyone milking the cows at the farms in Cabot are individual member owners. That's not how that producer co-op is set up. It's the farm businesses, right? A family farm or a farm LLC business that is the entity that is the member owner of a producer cooperative. Um, Whereas worker cooperatives, it's the individual member owner that of a workplace. And we have them all across lots of different sectors that are, that make up the membership of a worker cooperative. So they're working and governing their businesses together. And we're focused on worker co-ops today. There are also multi-stakeholder cooperatives or hybrid co-ops that mix some of those classes of membership, and I'm happy to talk about that if that's of interest. But we're focused again on the worker co-op arena. So people come to forming worker co-ops for many different reasons. Usually it's related to, creating good work, fair pay, job security, and meeting those needs in the community that I mentioned before. I founded Future Focus Media Co-op with three other folks to carry out the film work that I was passionate about, but also to embody the values in my business, right? I wanted to be part of the solidarity economy. I wanted to carry it out like that. So, we formed the Future Focus Media Co-op. We um, met for a year to really build out that vision. We were strong on the community side of things, and we were still figuring out how to create good work and fair pay for our workers as we got started. So you might be really good at one of these and move into another. Um, if any of this is resonating, I'd love to hear from you all. Why are you interested in the cooperative business model? What are there things listed here or things that I've mentioned or other reasons that, co-ops are of interest? Feel free to put it in the chat or come off mute and share anything. Well, feel free to chime in the chat as you think about what is motivating you to be here, right? Are we trying to embody the values in our, enterprises? Are we trying to make something that's sustainable for us and other coworkers in our community, etc.? So feel free to chime in on that. Now, worker ownership, when we talk about worker ownership broadly, we talk about uh, employee-owned companies, democratic workplaces, all are kind of under this broad umbrella, right? But when we talk about worker cooperatives, they have both of these components, the financial benefit and joint ownership, and the decision making that's democratic, right? And so there are plenty of employee-owned companies that have the financial benefit that are jointly owned by employees, right? There's employee stock ownership plans and other employee ownership situations that have the financial ownership, but not necessarily the democratic decision making. So those are worker-owned companies. They're in our broader umbrella, but they're not technically worker co-ops unless they're democratically owned and controlled. So there are also organizations that are democratically controlled, but don't necessarily have the joint ownership component, namely staff-directed nonprofits or democratic workplaces that are in a nonprofit type arena. Um, and I'm happy to talk about either of those if people are interested. But again, we're focused on worker co-ops today that have both of these components. Now, I'd like to share a little bit about the movement of worker co-ops in the US. There's somewhere, above 1,200 worker co-ops. It depends if you count all the ones still in formation. We have well above 1,200. Um, and but it's hard to nail down the exact amount, but we've been able to verify 751 in our last census. And 2 years before that, we verified 612, and 2 years before that, 326. So the movement is growing for sure. and that represents well over 10,000 workers in these cooperatives. But it's still small compared to other types of co-ops, right? We talked about consumer co-ops. Um, Among those are electric service cooperatives that have millions of members across the US, right? Um, but 10,000 workers or members, compared to millions of some of the other types of co-ops may not seem a lot, but it's people's workplaces and it's a deep connection to the democratic processes in the co-ops. And we're also quite connected to social movements compared to other sectors of co-ops as well. Our membership in the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops is over 425 members right now, but again, growing. It's definitely a growing movement. And just to share a little bit about the racial demographics and breakdown, sometimes we have the vision of a very white 70s co-op movement, but the reality of the worker co-ops is much more diverse. In fact, there's majority Black, Indigenous, people of color owned worker co-ops in the US. And there's a concentration in Latina communities where folks from Latin America and elsewhere and other immigrant communities have brought their culture of cooperation from their home countries and are making it work here in the US. Um, so yeah, just to share a little bit about that. And I also wanted to kick off with a few examples of member worker co-ops in our federation. Um, there's so many, but I'll just pull out a few. Pecan Milk Co-op in Atlanta area has been making great nut milks for many years and is a proudly Black-owned business there. Opportunity Threads is a cut and sew, um, upscale, upcycling textile cooperative and based in North Carolina. And amazing that they're able to make it work and grow to the, large numbers of members. I think they have over 30 members now uh, in an industry that's been really tough on small business, right? In the US especially. And so I think they make that work because they're part of these broader networks of the Carolina Textile District that connects makers, designers, entrepreneurs to the supply chain, right? A reliable, ethical supply chain. And they've gotten really deep support from a really powerful co-op development organization, Industrial Commons. So they had a special sauce there in North Carolina, and they're doing amazing stuff. Um, and then Shy Fresh in Chicago's doing some amazing work with formerly incarcerated folks and food, restaurants and food processing as well. Um, and then, I used to have this in the presentation as an existing member example, but they recently closed. But I kept it in because they gave us some tidbits of wisdom in their exit, discussion with them. They say, take it slow and raise the capital that you really need. Don't start in a deficit. Really be well capitalized as you get going. Be intentional about who you bring on as a worker owner. Don't rush that. Make sure there's a clear vision mission match with potential worker owners. And make sure that you price your services or products in order to thrive. That was another key component that they shared with us as well. Um, and focus on one thing, get really good at it. That's something I've seen with a lot of startups. They want to be everything to everyone, sort of, right? And they have 6 product lines that they're starting just with their team of 3 or 4 people, and it's really hard to be well known for one thing. So if you're in that boat and choosing, you know, where are we going to start? Be really clear about your product and service, your flagship one, right? And before you expand. And then and then be authentic in your marketing is the other thing they shared, right? It's about relationships as within your, with your co-op members and other folks, between your co-op and other institutions. That's something that's quite different from other small business. Cooperatives and other solidarity economy businesses really rely on those relationships, right? Uh, and building authentic relationships. You're not as much reliant on advertising and cold calls and those kind of things. You're building on a network that that can trust your offering as a cooperative. So thank you for those tidbits, Woke Foods. They were doing great work in Dominican Republic in the Bronx, but have moved on. Now let's talk about the internationally recognized 7 cooperative principles. These, now we're back to co-ops in general, espouse these 7 principles, but I'll talk about how they kind of show up in worker co-ops. So first, principle 1 is about voluntary and open membership. This doesn't mean you have to let anyone in as a full member at any time into your business. You need to hire people that, fulfill what you need in your cooperative, and then you need to have a fair and clear and accessible membership process for those workers to become member owners. This is where anti-oppression and equity work show up in these principles. There's some work to potentially bring, a more explicit 8th principle, but that's where, your hiring process, your membership process needs to be anti-oppression, needs to take into account anti-oppression principles and needs to be fair, and accessible. So that's a key component. If you're not into that openness, you can make it, quite a process and make sure that people are a really good fit before entered, but it can't be, willy-nilly of, this person is going to be locked out because we don't like their personality. You have to have a fair across the board kind of process for becoming a member. Democratic member control is where the members, once they are members, they have a say in major decisions in the co-op. This could be through a consensus process, modified consensus, majority voting, but whatever you do on the governance side of things, people have, the members have a large say. This could be um, running for the board of directors, being elected to the board, voting for the board of directors at a minimum, and making decisions on membership things like whether to close down at a minimum, but it could be much more than that, especially if you have a more horizontal or flat process or collective process, then members can have a lot of say on profit sharing and the acceptance of new members and lots of different decisions. And we do encourage from early on that you separate out what is governance, right? What are these long-term policy type decisions? If you've ever been involved in a nonprofit, that's the board usually holds a lot of the governance components, right? Um, and you keep those as a separate agenda ideally, and you alert people ahead of time when there's a major governance proposal, a new policy that will be in effect for a while. It's the long-term stuff, right? And then operations, right? And if you, that would be like the staff level or on the shop floor type decisions. And those you might empower to a manager or a committee or, you know, people that have specific roles on the operations side, right? And you can figure out your process on that side. But whatever you do, it's a really good idea to separate those out as early on as possible. Governance separate from operations. Member economic participation is about shared risk and reward, right? There's usually some sort of buy-in to your co-op. And then when the co-op does well, there's profit sharing that happens. And that's based on patronage. So patronage in a consumer co-op might be how much you buy from the co-op. If you're a member of REI, for example, the outdoors store, if you purchased a lot and they have a good year, you might get a dividend check at the end of the year. Um, Whereas in worker co-ops, it's about usually how many hours you've worked. So if there is profit to be shared, it usually goes more to the people who worked more and less to the folks who are working more part-time. Um, and uh, so that's the, economic participation, some sort of buy-in and setting that buy-in at a place where it's, something significant for potential members to invest, right? That can help you raise capital and build equity but it's not prohibitive for the type of members you want to include. And you can make it more accessible in different ways, having buy-ins over time, payroll deductions as they pay off their membership, making it a refundable thing when people leave, so it really is an investment. So there's lots of processes you can do, but whatever, usually it's most effective to have some sort of buy-in to the company. Principle four, autonomy and independence. Doesn't mean you can't be highly federated with folks, even a franchise, have memorandums of understanding, but you can't be beholden to another entity. You can't, have a government telling you what to do, or a nonprofit organization or another company hold you as a subsidiary, or having a forever veto on your board. You, as a co-op, need to be independent. You can have a subsidiary as a co-op, you can have a subsidiary, that's fine. But you need your ultimate autonomy and independence as a cooperative. Now, there's lots more I could say about relationships with nonprofits because there's a lot that could happen, that is positive and could go well with a relationship with a nonprofit, but you have to be careful and be clear about those arrangements from early on. Education, training, and information, principle five, needs to be a proactive thing in worker co-ops in order to really exercise the muscle of democratic member control. If you're not doing active leadership development and onboard, and not just in your onboarding component, but ongoing education opportunities, things like and ongoing training and professional development, then you will end up with a few people that already hold power, holding more and more power. So it needs to be a proactive thing. And a really key component of making a successful co-op is doing that education. In fact, we did cooperative academies, co-op academies for many, many years in Worcester, and we found that we needed a whole month-long module on unlearning what we knew about relating to each other and business and things like that before we could really build something different, right? We had to learn about the solidarity economy, really dig deep into anti-oppression work in order to really and tear apart what does individualism mean and how are we raised that way, especially if we're grown up in this country. That's a lot of work that's needed to really carry out a successful co-op. Cooperation among cooperatives is so important. We often shorten Principle 6 to P6. There's a P6 conference in Maine where co-ops of lots of different sectors come together once a year and collaborate. There's a lot that's happened around supply chains or value chains with co-ops in the US um, and elsewhere. And people in different regions are for sure helping each other. Co-ops uh, are really out there to support you. If you're looking for a sample business plan in your industry, we can probably connect you with another co-op that might be able to share their business plan and other, documentation that might be helpful, for example. So industry-wise and region-wise, there's a lot that can be said. I was really inspired by movements in Argentina where they were, recovering the factories that were closing down, and started really networking really strongly. So the Sanon tile factory in the south sent up this big shipment to help rebuild this four-star hotel Bowen in the capital that was offering this space for the National Congress of Worker Co-ops and Recovered Factories, and they were working alongside this Adidas plant, United Footwear Cooperative, that was doing, and they were doing joint childcare work with them, and they were all out on the streets when it came time to expropriate all the equipment that really belonged to the workers, not the owners that shut down their factory when the economic crisis happened. So they came together in all these amazing ways to support each other. And, I've always been inspired by that kind of cooperation among cooperatives. Concern for community looks different in different circumstances and communities, right? It could be a commitment to anti-gentrification in your community if that's a key component, and housing is an issue. It could be how you change your practices internally that are safer for workers. It could be meeting an additional, um, you know, issue in your community and in the way you provide your services or what kind of products you're offering. Um, Whatever you're doing, you're not doing harm in the community. You're solving a problem and you have a concern for the broader community. You could have a community accountability committee if you wanted on your, or you could have a board seat that, is available for a community member to represent a broader voice. There's lots of ways of having that broader accountability. So those are the seven co-op principles for co-ops in general. There are some additional principles that union co-ops espouse that are based on Mondragon principles. Mondragon is a large co-op conglomerate, worker co-op conglomerate in Basque Country in Spain, based in Basque Country, but it's working all over Europe. And those include sovereignty of labor, right? That workers need to have some independence. The instrumental and subordinate nature of capital is one. It's kind of a mouthful, but it's basically, capital is important to get started, but it has to be, subordinate to the, workers. And so people before profit basically is what that one's about. You might have one around wage solidarity where the highest earning person is not earning more than X times the lowest earning person in your co-op. And you might want to write that into your bylaws, right? So those are some additional principles to check out. There's a link in the resource document to those principles that a union co-op here in Massachusetts designed and can send you copies over. You can download the digital version. So that's a lot about principles, right? And people come to the worker co-op arena again is around creating this democracy, prosperity, community, shared vision, and culture. Co-ops are built on all three of these, but you might need to strengthen some. Um, so in other words, people are organized democratically. You're running a financially sustainable business and you're benefiting the community. Now, there's so many examples out there, but one I wanted to highlight is AORTA, the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance. They're organized very democratically in the way that they are set up, as a co-op of trainers and facilitators. They are financially viable and paying their members and workers, substantially better than most people would get in kind of a gig economy. Um, and they're meeting a need in the community and bringing benefit to the broader community in the form of train the trainers, sliding scale work, tools that are out there that they've created for around anti-oppression and things like that. So many more examples, but that's a great one to check out, aorta.coop. Now, we're focused on startups today, but a lot of people come to the co-op arena with an interest in converting an existing company into a cooperative. And this transition process is a interesting one, right? It involves fundamental and irreversible change in form, right? You're going from a company owned by one or two or three people into a co-op that will eventually involve many people in the ownership and decision making. And so it's a natural, messy, emergent process, right? As you become a butterfly, but the result can be beautiful. Um, it could be a commitment to gender justice as you go through this, or just the process of having more people involved in financial decisions or management decisions can result in something beautiful. And owners can come into this looking for an exit strategy, right? As a succession strategy, that's a potential, and there's tax incentives and there's reasons why you'd want to do that to hold on to some of the legacy that you're building in a business. But also, owners do this so that they can grow and share ownership, right? Um, or somewhere in between, right? An owner wants to grow it and eventually have an exit plan. So the good news is that if you know people in this boat, or if you're coming with an existing business in mind, there's a large community of support out there for this conversion or transition process. And there's a collaborative called Becoming Employee that's called the Workers to Owners Collaborative. And we have this website, becomingemployeeowned.org. That's a great resource. So please share that if you know any business owners considering this model. But again, we're focused on startups today, but a lot of what we'll talk about is relevant. And really the rest of this webinar is sharing a way of organizing all the work, describing what the work is and how it's specific to worker co-ops. But we share this way of organizing the work in case you're already have a team or you're building a team. In fact, it'd be great to hear in this poll where you're at with your team building. Is it just you right now? Do you already have a small team? So if you could complete this poll real quick, that'd be great. Because as you build your team or grow your team, you might want to see where people have strengths or interest to hold some of this work, right? You as a founding entrepreneur likely cannot hold everything. So how are you going to distribute the work? And we provide a framework that you can take and modify how you'd like. And it really, revolves around this culture and framework, the internal work, the entrepreneurship, which is like the business stuff, and the ecosystem external kind of work. So there's a mix, but quite a few of you have teams already. So be thinking of where your strengths lie and where other people's strengths lie. And if you're growing your team, think about what other skills you might need in your core team. So I'll get into each of these arenas. First, co-op capacity. This is around vision, membership, delegation of work, and accountability. Now, building a shared vision is one of the hardest components if you have a strong, idea of your business, if you've been working in this industry, to really, slow down and involve people in the broader vision. This was our process with Future Focused Media Co-op, where we went through a co-op academy for a whole year and would bring back some of the discussions into our group. And some of us were really, strong on like documentary filmmaking was my thing, right? Other people were really interested in youth training and had other, experience, and we had to sit down and really build a broader vision. And it was hard. We brought in some outside facilitation where, in a few places did some in-person retreats that really helped us get through some of these big decisions. But the end result was much stronger. I also saw this process with Riquezas del Campo, a community-owned farm in Western Massachusetts that was built around people coming from a workers' center, right? That were, you know, coming together around wage theft issues, but they wanted to feed their families and grow a sustainable farm business. And so it took quite a bit of facilitation and, understanding how they would build that broader vision before they could form their full co-op. So this first arena is also defining membership. First, what it means to be a member of the steering committee or the core group as you get started, but then in the long run, what it means to be a member of the cooperative. And this is key to be setting early on, right? What are the rights and responsibilities of your co-op? What are the contributions that people will be bringing to the co-op in addition to a fee, right? So you could think about this. We do workshops on this around rights and responsibilities. So financial participation, you talk about the right to profit sharing and patronage, but you also have the responsibilities to pay that fee, to provide your labor, to be involved in the budgeting processes, and occasionally losses, you might have, responsibility for that too. Education, we talked about this proactive, right? Educational opportunities and ongoing education, but you also have the responsibility on the other end to educate yourself and others and to be sharing the information. Governance, so you have the rights that I mentioned that are, fundamentally to vote and run for the board of directors, make membership-wide decisions, and it could be much more than that if you decide on a structure that allows for more than that. But then you have the responsibility to show up, be involved in that decision making, to vote, to carry out autogestión, right? This self-governance, self-management kind of process um, that is really balancing those individual interests that you've hopefully done some work to unlearn and the collective interests, right? And that's a tricky thing to do, right? If you're a board member of your co-op or a member of your co-op making major decisions, and you're also an individual worker that has needs, you're involved in that governance and balancing work. And then information, you should have the right to see the bylaws, major policies that affect you, financial information as it makes sense, but you also have the responsibility to be transparent. And there's a lot more that could be said about these rights and responsibilities, but I've laid out some of the fundamental ones. Um, and then learning to delegate work is a challenging component as well, in your steering committee and then ongoing. Um, if you're the organizer and you're holding down this first arena, this co-op capacity arena, then you're finding really empowering tasks for folks, right? And learning with people. Um, and there's lots of different ways to do that. Um, But also, if there's one concrete thing that would be good to set up early on in your steering committee or core group is a culture of accountability. Wow, Zoom like this accountability slide too. Or my gesticulations, not sure which. But it is a really key component that you build a culture of accountability, that you're going to hold each other to task. You're going to get stuff done, and you're going to have systems that support each other to do that, right? So first and foremost, you name the task. What is it specifically that needs to get done, and by when, and who is the person responsible for doing that? There can be support people, whatever, but ideally you have those three things well documented whenever major tasks come up or small tasks come up. And then you have a system to check in on the progress. And when things are done, you celebrate those accomplishments. And when they're not done, you check in and you see what else those, core group members need to get the task done. Do they need more information? Do they need reminders? Do they have too many tasks? What is it that's getting in the way of that? It's like, so why haven't you get the task done? It's not like why didn't you do the task? It's like what else do you need? How can we support you? And having a regular system of checking in on that. Maybe people here have preferences in project management software that you like to use. Those are good tools. Asana, Monday, Trello. But if you meet in the same room, maybe a whiteboard is the way to go. Or if you are spreadsheet people, maybe it's just a spreadsheet is all you need. But whatever you do, set up a system of accountability early on. And I'm going to share a fictitious example of a co-op that just dove into the operations and kind of let some of this accountability slide. And they were so excited about their llama pepper farm that they went out there with unclear roles and they were doing some fun work and they, grow some good peppers that first season, but they realized, meetings were kind of a mess. Some important tasks were just not getting done and were getting dropped, and there was some real resentment building up. So what they decided to take a little step back, have a few extra meetings, and they set up some better systems. So they set up those task systems that I mentioned, but they also set up job descriptions. They were a collective, non-hierarchical, horizontal uh, collective structure, but they still decided we need work plans and job descriptions, and we're going to do evaluations. We're going to do it the first month someone comes on, 3 months for that new person, 6 months, and then a year again for everyone. And they did peer evaluations in that way, in a proactive way. And most of them were pretty short check-ins. Oh yeah, that work it needs to shift this way. But they had a space to bring up when things were starting to not work so well and be proactive around that. They also set up systems like a mentorship or like a buddy system for people coming on. And then they realized they needed some systems if things were really to get bad and to show some ongoing harm or an acute instance of harm, they needed a grievance procedure, suspension, or a harm, uh, adjustment procedure, suspensions, and removals, right? So they set up all those policies. They came back and they had much more effective meetings. They expanded, their fields. They got more llamas. They had more work days where volunteers were spat on in their face by the llamas. Learn from their great example. Um, all joking aside, accountability system is very important from the early on. And if you're holding down this first arena of co-op capacity, take it on yourself to build that out. The second arena is business development, and I'd love to hear from folks where you're at with or what your experience has been in small business. This isn't necessarily co-op business. This is small business in general. Have you started a small business before? You're pretty new to it. Okay. Well, we have quite a bit of experience in the room. So I'm not going to harp on a lot of the things that are common to small businesses too much. Um, Looks like a bunch of you have run businesses before. Great. So much of what starting a co-op is starting a small business, right? And so you all have a lot of that experience. Um, for the folks who are not as, well versed on business, what's key and even though some of us do have business experience, we sometimes forget this too. We come in with our mission and we intrinsically know that the community needs this, but we haven't done the work to really do the feasibility, right? So that means knowing who our target customers are and really articulating that, and then figuring out what key problem they're facing and what the other people are, other companies are doing that are not meeting that need and what you're going to offer that's unique, right? Your unique selling proposition, whatever you want to call it. You can use tools like the business model canvas to help you figure this stuff out, but really articulate this stuff well so that you have a strong revenue stream that you can build, as a building block of your business. Don't skip this intrinsically. Oh, I know, we know this because me and my friends need this. No, is there a market out there? Have you gone out there and surveyed people? Have you done focus groups? Whatever, have you done some research about your market and whether it's growing or shrinking? Um, and so don't skip this part. It's, not too unique to co-ops. But again, it could be more relational than some small business work. Um, and there are some tools out there. Start.coop has some great adaptations um, of the business model canvas called the ownership model canvas and things like that. But whatever you do, get some real data in from potential customers and be really clear on these fundamentals so that you're not a year in and still struggling to just get a basic revenue stream and can't really fulfill all the other components of it. So, um, yeah, and talking about the startup process in general, we have this idea that it would be great to have an idea. We form our team, our business plan is done, check. Our governance and policy documents, stamped, approved. We've formed our legal entity and we're in operation. In reality, it's not such a linear process, right? We might have a partial business plan. We've built our team, but we come back and rebuild our team later. We have, draft governance documents as we, revisit our business plan and are in partial operation. And this iterative process, right, as we come back to things and improve them is good. And hopefully you also have a team that can hold multiple, components, but know that there's a lot going on at once. And you'll likely need to form a legal entity before you raise some major capital. So since you all have experience with businesses, why do you form a legal entity in general? Why is it a good idea to form a legal entity instead of being a partnership, informal, collective? What's the benefit of having a legal entity? I know you know this. Liability, yeah, say more. That's the main reason, liability, right? You shield yourself with an entity. It shields your personal assets, your legal situation from that of the business to some degree, right? Limited liability companies, corporations, do a similar job of that, right? So that's the main reason. It's also taxation, right? If you want to be taxed the right way, usually an entity can help you do that. And owning collective assets, under an entity makes sense as a cooperative too. So what legal entity makes sense for you? There are many that you can choose from. LLC might work really well for a lot of people because it's a flexible thing. It's in every state. People are familiar with it. You can have an LLC and be taxed as an owner, right? With partnership taxation instead of as an employee. That could be beneficial in lots of different ways. Um, or you could have a cooperative corporation statute in your state that is a really good fit and sets you up for cooperative taxation in a really good way and locks it into your legal entity that you are a co-op. Um, or maybe there's a limited cooperative association that allows some of the flexibility, but also has the co-op components. Or maybe a C corporation makes sense because you're raising capital a certain way. Um, and you can still be taxed as a co-op corporation. So whatever you do, we really encourage you to answer some key questions first, right? Discuss things like who are the members? How are they going to become members? How are you making decisions? Are you going to have a board of directors or is everyone going to be on the board? Um, how do you want to be taxed, right? As an owner or as an employee? Do you have people in your community that use ITINs, right? Tax identification numbers because they're international or other reasons. Um, and you need to be, owners and taxed as owners, not as employees. Or are you going to be raising capital in a way that it's really beneficial to be taxes as employees and have investment vehicles? So make some of those decisions and then find a co-op savvy lawyer. And if you don't know one, we can help you connect to one. Um, and then they can help you sit down and find the right legal entity. Uh, if you just sit down with a lawyer and say, this is the co-op stuff and we're interested in this, they might just, move you towards something they're familiar with. Or they might, you know, guide you in a direction that doesn't make sense. Try to answer some of these questions, ideally with the support of a co-op developer or advisor, and then sit down with a lawyer and find the right legal entity. And I'm happy to talk about more about those legal forms and what I've noticed being useful for people. But I'm not a lawyer, but I'm happy to go into that in the discussion or if people have questions now. Um, but it is kind of state to state specific often too. And people are like, well, what state should we, we have people in multiple states. What state should we incorporate in? Is there a state that's best for co-ops? Yeah, there are states that have better co-op statutes, and that could be a factor you want to take into account. But usually co-ops form that have people in multiple states form in a state where they have a reliable mailing address, have a critical mass of employees, have favorable employment laws. Those things might be more important than the co-op statutes, but those are things to consider as well. Colorado has great co-op statutes. California has a lot of great support for co-ops with the Sustainable Economies Law Center and other groups. Um, Here in Massachusetts, we have some good co-op laws. Illinois has a great limited worker co-op association that's a good fit for a lot of folks. So check it out. But let's talk a little bit about taxation, a little bit more about how co-op taxation works as a cooperative corporation. You can still be an LLC and choose to be taxed like this, but this is subchapter T, right? You might have heard of subchapter S or like, S corporations are taxed under sub S or C corporations under C. Well, co-ops get taxed under subchapter T if you want to take advantage of this co-op taxation. Now, folks who are members have hats here, and people who are not yet members don't have hats. The members here generate, a net margin that is called surplus, right? Um, and those are often distributed to the members, and there's some interesting choices you can do about that. Profit is generated by the non-members, and that goes to be taxed at the corporate level. So see here, we got profit over here that goes into that collective account is taxed as at the corporate level. Surplus, you can put some in your collective account. You can also choose to pay it out in member patronage. And again, that's usually based on hours worked, right? Usually it's a yearly decision. You sit down and you see how many hours people have worked, and they got that percentage of this profit sharing. There's other ways to do it, but that's the most common. And you have a second choice point here to pay some out the year that that you're making the decision. We call that paying that out in cash, right? And people have to pay individual taxes, so usually have to pay out at least 20% so they can cover their taxes on that. But some of it you can put into an IOU type of thing that's called an individual capital account. And usually their buy-in is the beginning of that capital account. And then if there's a profit share, it goes in above that. And it's just an accounting, it's not a separate bank account. It's an accounting of people's share in the cooperative, but it's a flexible way to use that equity to reinvest and to grow the co-op without having to pay taxes twice on it, right? To pay this corporate tax and then to pay it out to people and then to reinvest it in the co-op. Well, no, you can be taxed either at the individual level or the corporate level, and reinvest it in the co-op in this cool way. And then usually when people leave the co-op or when the co-op decides to pay it out, they can take these individual capital accounts free and clear of tax for usually in most circumstances. And yeah, that's those are called individual capital accounts or internal capital accounts. And you don't need to know all the details of this. There are co-op accountants that we can connect you with to set this up when you're ready to do it. But you should have some language of how profit sharing works in your co-op, and this is a good way to do it if you want to take advantage of this. You're also thinking about how to raise startup capital, right? Lenders are a great place to start. There are lenders out there that get co-ops that are not going to ask you for individual credit scores or going to require your own car or house as collateral in case the loan goes bad that would need to pay back, right? That might be part of the equation, but they're not going to require that. They're going to be looking for, that you have good collective capacity and connection to support, and your business plan has assumptions that really make sense and things like that, that you have the right team in place. So, um, as sometimes starting a small business, you want to have all your ducks in a row before you sit down with the banker, right? To get a loan. It's a little different. These lenders are community lenders. Most of them are community development financial institutions that are out there to just reinvest this money into co-op, social enterprises. So meet with them early on. Say, hey, we're thinking we'll need this type of capital. What do we need to get there? What does your loan process look like? So there's a list of them in the resource document, right? If you're in the Northeast, Co-op Fund in the Northeast has been doing this for over 40 years and has, millions of dollars available for co-ops specifically, and they're used to working with co-ops. If you're elsewhere in the country, Shared Capital Cooperative does this all day long. If you're in a city that has a chapter, Seed Commons Cooperative is a great partner, and there's many others out there too. So start with those folks. But if you're also looking for some sort of investor equity, it looks a little different in co-ops, right? uh, small businesses might sell some early shares or board seats or things like that. And there's a big upside if the company does well for those early investors or angel investors. In co-ops, it's a little different. You can raise equity, right? And it's a good way to have patient capital that you only pay back when you're doing well. But you're making different promises. You're not giving, forever board seats. You're not offering a big say in the company. Um, you're not offering like full ownership. You're offering an investment opportunity that could potentially have an upside and an opportunity that people really believe in what you're doing, and usually some sort of fixed rate that you agree upon ahead of time. When you can pay that back, you will. And people have raised, a lot of money this way, but you need to be clear, with your investment strategy. Now, if you're doing anything around investment, even, payback on membership shares or things like that, you're triggering um, securities laws, right? So you want to make sure you have legal counsel to cover your assets for for that investment kind of opportunity, and how you advertise that and all that. You need to be really clear on the securities laws. They're no joke, even on small co-ops. The SEC will get you. No, just cover your bases. And just, don't let any one person mem put it on a credit card with 20 something percent interest. Do it right. Try to do it collectively. You can get creative. You can do crowdfunding, bartering, pre-selling, but try to do it together, right? All right, we've said a lot about legal and taxes and capital. If there are any questions, feel free to put those in the chat and I can address them. Or yeah, I don't know how this is landing. It's a lot that is different for worker co-ops and small businesses, right? Um, but as Woke Foods left with us, don't try to start this undercapitalized, right? That's a big reason small businesses fail, co-ops included. Okay, so you're also thinking about how to set up your governance and management structures. Now, to keep you on your feet, the hats here represent board members, not members. So maybe you have enough members that it makes sense to elect a board of directors. Um, and then the board of directors oversees a manager or a team of managers. And the manager oversees the operations and the workers and, holds them accountable. And maybe you have this cycle of accountability in your structure. Equal exchange, for example, a fair trade coffee and other goods company, has well over 100 members. So they have elected board, and then they oversee the co-CEOs and the management team, and they have this kind of cyclical thing. And there's a very clear structure that the manager and the operations teams have a say on the operations side, and the board really has this clear role on the governance side, right? And there, um, so that's one structure you could do. But you can get creative. There are plenty of non-traditional structures where everyone's on the board, or you have a very committee-based structure, team-based. You could use a dynamic governance and decision-making process like sociocracy that's linked in the resource document, that is you know, a team-based egalitarian approach to decision-making, and holacracy is another similar one where you're really empowering committees to make decisions that affect them and affect their work areas. You can do that at scale, or that works really well for small collectives as well. So think about what structure makes sense and separate out that governance structure from your operation structure, but then ideally meld it back together. How is it going to fit in a broader cooperative structure? And the second arena really is holding down some of that component too in the business development arena. In the third arena, we're talking about getting technical assistance, social movement connections, customer commitments, government grants, etc. We call it the ecosystem development. You're creating the conditions out there that will allow you to succeed. So we have this uh, resource, the service provider directory, that can help you find the right folks to help to provide technical assistance. Maybe you have a great co-op developer nonprofit organization in your region that does this, right? And they have grants they can leverage to do this technical assistance, etc. They're usually good on democratic processes, on decision making, etc. Um, and maybe you want to reach out to our co-op clinic for, conflict mediation policies and stuff like that. Um, but there's a lot of support out there for businesses in general. And like we mentioned, starting a co-op business is in large part starting a small business. So all the marketing components, your financial projections, your feasibility work, your sales plan, all of that, a lot of portions of your business plan are pretty similar to other small business. So you could get support from the Small Business Administration, an SBDC, right, a Small Business Development Center, Center for Women in Enterprise, a business school at a college or university. There's lots of different places to reach out for some of that kind of business, general small business support too. So you might want to, this person is maybe thinking of the right recipe of support. Um, and then finding lawyers, bookkeepers, and accountants that get co-ops too. You want to find the right folks, and we can help you with that. We have direct in this directory, and if you're not finding the right folks, reach out. We have other databases we can look up and other relationships we can help connect you to those folks. This third arena is also thinking about where to connect to social movements, right? We bring this mission forward kind of social enterprise kind of approach, and we want to be catalysts for change. But we also have to live up to that too. And we've found that co-ops often lose this over time because you're hiring for the need in your business, right? And the founders often have this really strong, connection to the social movement and the mission and vision components. And then you're hiring on, and if you're not really intentional about who you're hiring, how you're doing your onboarding and training, ongoing training components and connections, incentives in your co-op for movement engagement, things like that, then it can often dilute and you can lose, your mission focus. So keep an eye on that. Also, there's so many examples of groups that are doing this well. Just to name a few, Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, very connected to Black liberation struggles for years there, and doing a network of small co-ops. Mandela Food Co-op has really walked the walk around food justice in their community and their, community-owned grocery, worker-owned grocery. Design Action Collective has done artwork for movements on a sliding scale for years and years. There's so many examples out there, but those are a few that are really walking the walk. You might also want to consider being a union co-op. Why do we want to be union if we're already worker owned? There are some good reasons to do it. Unions have resources, experience likely in your industry or some of the processes you're putting together. It's another layer of worker protection, even in small co-ops, but especially in larger co-ops. There's power dynamics that arise, and it's another voice for workers to have directly on policies that affect them. And then through union collaboration, you can have organizing power and industry impact. We have this Union Co-op Council that has a lot of information on that. And on the last point, I'd love to share an example of industry impact. Cooperative Home Care Associates is a large worker co-op in the Bronx that, in part through their association with SEIU, and having a union co-op model, they're able to impact not just, wages and working conditions for home care workers in New York City, but nationally, right? They're really having an impact on home care. Um, so that's just one example, but there's many others as well. And this third arena might also be out there networking to find contracts, right? Maybe through anchor institutions that are like the educational and medical institutions that have in their mission to support the community. Well, they can do that by buying from co-ops, right? Maybe you're out there doing coupons or pre-sales or engagement with potential customers, polls and forums and networking events and things like that, but getting real engagement from customers, right? You're also looking, are there any government grants or preferred vendor programs that make sense to sign up for? Workforce development initiatives and grants are great because the deliverables for those are create jobs, train up people. What are you doing when you're starting a co-op? You're creating jobs and you're training up people. So even if you don't get those grants directly, see if there's a partner that has workforce development dollars available to help pay for some of it. Maybe there's a geographic incentive in the neighborhood you're looking at to put up a facade program to put up a nice sign or something like that. So you look out and for these government opportunities to connect as well. So those are the three main arenas. Again, where are you strong and where can you build out your team to cover all these bases? And as you're thinking of building out your team, remember equity and inclusion in all of its senses, right? So our co-op future focus was diverse racially and age-wise and economic background. Um, but we were all cisgendered men, the four founders, and that created this culture that was really hard to change, and to really embody gender justice as we went forward. So think about it in all the different ways that you want to represent your community, that you want to be inclusive in your workplace. And as you build your team, think about who you're prioritizing an outreach for and how you're doing your outreach. It's tricky when you're building your team, you don't have your business in operation yet. Maybe it's not a paid position yet, but you still can do job descriptions or, a hiring type process, interviews, making sure that there is a really good fit before they become an essential part of your core group. Happy to talk more about that. We're coming up pretty soon on the question and answer period. So start thinking, what are the questions or additional resources you want or can offer? So again, it's this co-op capacity, internal stuff, the business development, and the broader ecosystem development. Maybe you're good at the group process and hold down that first arena. Maybe you love spreadsheets and have started businesses before, so you'll hold down the business stuff and really empower someone to hold down the group process stuff or the mobilization, the ecosystem development. Again, we have this service provider directory to find other movement partners and co-op developers out there that, really good resources to check out. We have lots of resources on our website. You've probably found a bunch of resources out there, but I want to highlight a few of some of the best and some of our guides that can help you navigate it too. Sustainable Economies Law Center, I mentioned them, especially California, but throughout the US, their resources are useful. Um, legal resources. If you're interested in the worker self-directed nonprofit or a democratic nonprofit workplace, then they have great resources on that as well, theselk.org. Our sister organization, Democracy at Work Institute, at institute.coop has a searchable resource library and this great guide for democratic management that I highly recommend. It's free for download there. LA Co-op Lab has an online co-op academy that's great and other resources. That's bilingual English Spanish, and you can kind of a self-paced online co-op academy. Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy has a lot of great tools right there on their website, easy to access, easy to use. Co-op Cincy has great resources. They're very connected to Mondragon and Union Worker Co-op work in Cincinnati, Ohio, but have built tools like this worker owner workbook that's available there for free. And start.coop is an accelerator and uh, has a bunch of tools on their website that are useful and kind of a self-paced course you can take as well. And we've created these mini guides that help you navigate okay, so I'm thinking about hiring right now. What do I need to think about that's co-op specific and what are the best resources? So we've done that for a lot of different arenas. Hiring, onboarding, conflict resolution, because conflict in a hierarchical traditional company often looks like firing or demoting or, you know, reprimanding or something like that. In a co-op, you usually want a different approach, right? So we have a lot of resources on conflict resolution. Now you know you need all this technical assistance. Where do you get funding for that? We have a guide. Setting membership fees, financing your co-op, co-op structure, founders compensation, right? Founders compensation looks different in a co-op than another company. Um, and we have some tips on how to do that. Um, Setting up your board of directors or steering committee in the co-op. We have two different guides on that. And member removal process, we have one on that as well. So check out those mini guides. Um, And then we have a grant that can help support technical assistance with our clinic for rural organizations. If you're working in a USDA designated rural area, you should definitely reach out and we can see if we can support um, and cover the cost of our technical assistance. Otherwise, it's a fee for service um, offering that we have where you basically do your support, right? You fill out that form, you get our calendar, we do an intake call, we get you resources. And if you're ready for a project and it's a good fit for us, we um, we get you a draft scope of work that you can look over and see if it, makes sense. And then we find the right advisor from our network of peer advisors. And then we match you up and we cover it with our grants if we can, or we send you, invoices along the way and evaluation at the end. That's basically how our co-op clinic works. Um, and we try to keep our rates as affordable as possible, but compensate our advisors well too. So reach out when you feel ready for that, consultation. And we also encourage you to consider membership in the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-op. We are the national grassroots entity that's out there representing, organizing, supporting, advocating with and for worker co-ops to make the laws better, to make, to get health related benefits for co-ops. It's hard as a small company to get access to good rates on dental care, accident disability insurance, retirement plans, and we've been able to leverage our joint membership on some really good deals there. So reach out if that's of interest too. As part of our membership benefits, you get discounted technical assistance. You can get access to these peer networks and member councils too, other people in your arena or interest area. And we also do some great events, so you can get discounts in those. Um, and there's this startup membership, right? Maybe you're not a full-fledged company in operation with your full bylaws and things, but you can still become a member and get access to all these member benefits and then get a vote when you are a fully formed company. It's 250 a year. There's ways of working on that if it's prohibitive. Um, we have free member workshops for people who join as well. So check out that startup membership. There's a similar one for conversions if you're in that arena and converting a company. It's also 250 and similar deal. Yeah, we have these member councils that are member-only spaces to engage in deeper conversations about immigrant cooperatives or racial and economic justice or other things. We have a sustainer program. If you're not ready to start, but you want to support this work, we'd be happy to have your support in that way, becoming a sustainer, a monthly contribution. And we also have a shop co-op page where you can shop from co-ops. Um, just a heads up that there is this law that's kind of in limbo right now, but may come back into place where you'll need to do some extra reporting as a new business, especially new LLCs have some pretty hefty reporting. So know about the Corporate Transparency Act. I just posted the blog post we have about that. Um, and we have a few upcoming events, but namely we do this conference every couple years. We just did one in September, and a lot of the recordings are available on our YouTube channel, so check those out. And we're coming up on the discussion portion of this. I'm happy to take it whichever direction. If you have to jump, please fill out this feedback form. It's just a few quick questions. But yeah, I don't see any questions lingering, but feel free to come off mute and ask questions. The conference will not be this year. We will be doing a series of summits or webinars in November that will bring people together and be a good place to connect. So look out for that. But the next in-person conference will be the fall of 2026. There's a question, is there such a thing, a co-op that has employee owners? and also other employees that are not owners. Yes, this is very common for worker co-ops. Um, well, not on a path to ownership is a question in the movement, but yes, you could decide in your co-op that you have employee owners, you have non non-member non-members that are also employees that could choose to get on membership track, or they could choose to not be on membership track. You could set that up. You could decide that everyone has to be on a membership track within a certain period of time too. That's up to you. But whatever you do, you have an opportunity for people to engage in that membership track, right? But yes, you could decide that, we're in an industry where there's just a lot of turnover in this section of our co-op, and we want to have people have the choice to just be employees and not go through the whole membership process. Some folks might not think that's the best idea for a co-op, but plenty of co-ops do that, and yes, you could definitely do that, Davey. Thanks for asking that question. Yeah, I mean, there's certain concerns with that. Maybe if you have this kind of two classes of workers, right? People who have permanently decided not to be members and people who are members, there are power dynamics that exist with that. But as long as you are doing that intentionally and there's good reasons behind that, um, there's nothing in the co-op principles or, that prohibits that for sure. So I'm happy to
Yeah.
go in any other direction. Yeah, go ahead.
I thank you for responding to that question. I'm thinking of it because in my business we have like a handful of us who are part-time to full-time who would certainly want to be owners. And then there are a whole bunch of other people who are very part-time who, if we were anywhere besides Massachusetts, they would be contractors. And I know co-ops can have contractors, but the rules about who counts as an employee are a little different in Massachusetts. And there are people who are working like 2 hours a month. And so it wouldn't make sense for them in the same way. So I'm trying to figure out how we might navigate that.
Right. So in that case, you might just want to have a threshold that they're working a minimum of 20 hours a month or whatever that threshold is. And so then if they get more involved and become a different kind of tier in there, they are eligible for membership. But that, you want those kind of things across the board that make sense for your industry or your company, what you want to decide, but you're not haphazardly moving that target around because you don't like someone or, that across the board that makes sense. And you're going to have that goal and that threshold because, yeah, someone who works 2 hours a month having the same say as someone who's working, hundreds of hours a month doesn't that doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of circumstances. There's another note here. Could it be a multi-stakeholder cooperative? That could work, but typically multi-stakeholders is how you're relating to the co-op. Yeah, sure. If those contractors are more like producers and they do their independent work and they sell their stuff through the co-op, and it's really the staff and the employee owner workers that are a different membership class, and so you kind of have a producer class and a worker class, and you want to delineate those. That could be a multi-stakeholder co-op kind of arrangement. But if it's just based on how many hours they do, you probably wouldn't want to separate that out as a different member class and form a whole multi-stakeholder co-op. Multi-stakeholders are good for representing different interests and types of engagement in a co-op. Consumers or, very different than employees at a business, for example. And the and there's good reasons for involving broader community ownership or consumer ownership, but it makes it more complicated to run that kind of multi-stakeholder business and to do governance well. So make sure you have a good reason to involve people in major decisions as members, right? That's what membership means in co-ops. It's decision making and profit sharing, right? And if there's not a reason to have both of those components, you could have an affiliate program or something where people feel really engaged and have a stake and maybe have a seat on an accountability committee or something like that, but aren't the major decision-making, automatic board seats, etc., kind of people that would get, profit sharing and all that kind of thing. So consider that highly. We have a member matrix tool that you can find on our website that helps you kind of work that out. Do we need multiple member classes? Should we consider multi-stakeholder? Or can we just say this is an affiliate, right? They're very integral into our business plan and they'll have a say and they'll be involved in our annual meetings or whatever, but they don't need to be a member owner class, right? Or whatever. So you can think that. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm happy to go into like good size of team or working with nonprofits or worker self-directed nonprofits or immigrant co-ops or any direction people are wanting to go for the last few minutes. I see we have a lot of people in kind of like service oriented industries, right? And and so as you build your business out, right, it's important to find the right tools and templates that fit that service thing. You don't want to start with like a retail or industrial business plan and try to build it out into your service industry. So that's something to look for, and we can help you find the right starting places for that. Any other questions or comments or other resources people have already found useful that I didn't mention? People want to share
I
here?
have I have a question.
Go ahead, Mo.
So, where we are in our organizing, because it is deeply rooted in organizing what we're doing, we're focused on Black and Indigenous solidarities here locally in Tacoma, Washington State. And we are focusing on arts education, culture, and community enterprise, as well as cooperative enterprise. Um, and right now, we're in a place where this work is, I want to consider it in startup, and I guess startup can be kind of a wide variety of placements. But we are still developing this work. We have a strong vision. We have a strong vision for the space we want to hold. This will be really holding space for community and solidifying a community asset that will be a building that will house it will be a commercial building that will house um, the work we're doing. And right now, where we're at is kind of finding the champions that are outside of our current stewardship team. So there's about four of us who are stewarding the vision and holding the space for this work through volunteer work. Um, and now we're looking to, in many ways, formalize a lot of these relationships. And the idea that came up is sort of a general membership, and not quite sure what that means yet, but really just having a way for folks to feel that they belong in the space. We don't have the space yet, but they belong in this kind of organizing space that we're carving out. And in the near future, it may show up as a permanent real estate cooperative. It may show up in another way. So we're just trying to weigh our options, but also give folks a way to feel like there's some sort of reciprocity. So in startup, I guess I'm getting to my question. In startup, what is a way to kind of gather folks in a meaningful way, um, to maybe even have them become the initial members of the space, but we don't quite yet have, it'll likely be multi-stakeholder, but we don't quite yet have like categories or classes just yet of how we're going to do this. So in your experience, is there any other ways that we could formalize those relationships with just community folks, individuals, kind of an individual level membership that's more general to just like we support this work?
Yeah. So there's multiple ways groups have engaged folks, reading groups, book clubs, um, general workshops where you're having participatory spaces to engage on these topics of like, how is it going to be formed? What kind of involvement does the broader community want? How do we want to set up accountability measures to make sure that this is for, this entity is forever kind of connected and responsive to community needs. Um, but I would also be wary of setting up this like interim membership and then the long-term membership and having those be separate things. I've seen groups get kind of stuck there. If it sounds, without knowing the details, it's hard to weigh in exactly, but it sounds like a lot of the work you're doing is in the nonprofit arena too. So I don't know if you have a partner or are forming a nonprofit that can hold a lot of this and a broader membership thing that isn't as much an ownership stake, but is a real, way to have a say in the project. Um, it is tricky because nonprofits are ultimately accountable to the broader public and to their board of directors and to funders to a certain degree, whereas co-ops are really accountable to their members, right? So sometimes co-ops form, but with a really close relationship with a nonprofit to get access to those dollars through a fiscal agent or fiscal sponsor or fiscal host. They call them multiple things. But some sort of relationship with someone who can get those grants, the charitable dollars that can, set up a membership structure that makes sense there. But also you have your core co-op that is an enterprise that's independent of that has some revenue generating something and is accountable to the members. There's a lot more probably could be said, but I don't know if I just scratched some of the, surface of those questions, Moo, but yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Interactive workshops. We're like, this is what a co-op is, and this is some of our vision. Can you chime in on the vision component? We're still setting up our membership process, but get involved in this way, or having really clear roles. Like we're looking for a champion on this, champion of this, to be committee member that can really dedicate themselves to once a month. Be really clear and upfront about those expectations as much as you can with folks so that you're not getting people who just have like a foot in the door and are talking a big game, but then don't really have capacity to follow through and you're running into those issues. Yeah. Any other last burning questions? If you have to jump, please fill out this feedback form. And if there's nothing else, let Taina Sili La Banda Rebelde bring us out with their No es mi presidente, not my president song. Thank you for coming today. Feel free to connect with us whenever it makes sense.